028, relationships. We have relationships with our pets, our jobs, our spouses, our kids, and our neighbors. We have relationships with the other 7 billion people on the planet and with every animal, insect, and plant as well. We have a relationship with everything, and everything has a relationship with us. And it is possible to become addicted to any or all of them. Very few relationship addicts are addicted to more than one at a time, but like the drug addict, they will often move from one to another in a similar class. When I moved on from my cocaine relationship, I replaced it with methamphetamine. They were both stimulants, so I didn't exactly move on. Most relationship addicts will move from one to another of a similar type, romantic to romantic, platonic to platonic, parental to parental, etc. Relationship aversion can be an addictive behavior, as well as some people avoid relationships to unhealthy and depriving degrees. We will begin with relationship saturation addiction and then explore aversion, and both include strategies for recovery and improvement. Codependence. Let's clear up a common misconception about codependence. A codependent is someone who bases his or her emotional state or thoughts on someone else's. If my partner is in a bad mood, I am in a bad mood. If I am in a bad mood and she comes home in a good mood, I'm suddenly in a good mood. What is missing is the independence of mood, mentality, or attitude. This is not a book on relationship issues, so we will not explore codependence beyond the basics and how it relates to relationship addiction. Codependence is the assimilation of another person's mood and perception, whereas dependence is becoming reliant on someone. My cat is dependent, relying on me for food and water. If the cat's moods and emotions were determined by mine, he would be codependent. Dependence is often mistaken as codependence. The relationship-dependent person is a version of relationship addiction, because dependence is always a quality of addiction. Compelled. The relationship addict feels compelled to be in a relationship at all times and at severe costs. The most common driving forces of relationship addiction are as follows. 1. Companionship, to avoid feeling alone or feeling loneliness. 2. Material comfort or certainty. 3. Validation and identification. Companionship. We all like and crave some level of companionship. If we sacrifice other needed healthy factors of our lives to acquire or preserve companionship, it becomes a toxic dependence. If you regularly avoid work or other responsibilities simply to spend time with someone, this indicates dependence. If you are jeopardizing work, other relationships, or life needs to gain more time with someone, especially excessive time, this indicates a pathology. It may be sensible for me to avoid work to spend time with a visiting relative who's only in town for a day or two, but it is not sensible for me to avoid work or other responsibilities for several days, or to risk my work reputation in exchange for time with that family member who is in town for a week or more, or for a person I have spent substantial time with recently and will again. Companionship addicts are driven by a sense of fear that they will miss out on something if they do not prioritize that person as first. These addicts are driven by a subtle yet very uncomfortable fear of being alone. For them, being alone forces them to confront a suspicion they have of themselves that they are not adequate company. They are afraid they cannot stimulate or entertain themselves, and secretly suspect that they are not interesting enough, smart enough, or simply likable enough to spend time with alone. They are afraid they will not like themselves as company. Therefore, they avoid it so they do not have to make the needed personality improvements or corrections, which are intimidating and fearful. They are afraid that even if they did try to improve or correct themselves, they might fail, and their worst nightmare would be realized, the nightmare of realizing they are a worthless person. No one is worthless, and that's a fact. There are hosts of psychological conditionings that create this fear. Conditioning from childhood, from society, from a past trauma can install this fear, and we can be oblivious to it because of denial mechanisms. Companionship addicts tell themselves they are people persons, and that it is a conscious choice of lifestyle. To interact with people is the most fulfilling way to spend time. Who can argue with that? Spending time with others is indeed a fulfilling way to be, as long as that remains in the realm of want and not need. As mentioned, if you blow off, even damage other relationships, obligations, or important life factors, it is no longer healthy or a preference or a want. It has become a compulsory need, an addiction. If some level of depression, sadness, or feeling somewhat incomplete always materializes without the relationship interaction, it is no longer healthy. Material comfort or certainty. Material comfort is a needed factor of life. We all need to feel secure and safe, and for most of us, this translates to home, clothes, food, entertainment, and other things we've been fortunate enough to categorize as real needs, like a car, a bed, money, furniture, and other possessions that keep us from feeling vulnerable to an unpredictable world. It's easy to say these things like cars are not truly needs, especially when we know full well that there are people in this world that have no such things. Indeed, technically, a car or a nice home is a luxury, not a need. However, if you have no personal experience with poverty or the lack of these comforts, you're not spoiled. You're merely conditioned, as we all are, to specific features of life. No, you won't die or starve to death without that Lexus in the driveway or some money to shop with, but try to tell your subconscious addictive mind this is not a survival issue. It will not listen because it defines everything that is familiar as pleasure and everything unfamiliar as pain. And we are, all of us, driven by this pleasure-pain principle to nearly survival degrees. Certainly as infants, we were totally dependent on our parental caregivers. As adults, we can designate someone in the same category and feel dependent upon them for our sense of material stability. Compromising values or beliefs purely to sustain the relationship is an indication of this version of addiction. I'm not talking about passively tolerating someone's irritating qualities. I'm referring to more like tolerating or justifying violence, infidelity, abuse, or polar opposite beliefs or morals to keep that Lexus in the driveway. Validation. We are all addicted to validation to a certain degree. Validation is how we define our value. Without it, we feel inadequate and insecure. I once overheard a conversation in an office by two coworkers who did not know I was listening. The first coworker said in a condescending tone, "Oh, there's Bob over there." The second worker replied, "Oh, you don't like Bob? That's funny. Just the other day, Bob made some comment about not liking you either." "What? Bob doesn't like me? What did I ever do to him?" "Well, what do you care? You just said you didn't like him anyway." "Yeah, well, I know, but I've never done anything to Bob." We would all prefer to live in a world where absolutely everyone liked us, even those we don't like. If we are disliked, it implies we're not as perfect as we would like to believe we are. A minute later, Bob walked up to both of them, and the first guy, who didn't even like Bob, was overly polite, obviously trying to impress Bob with his friendliness and acceptance. This shows that being liked and approved of, and therefore validated, is paramount. I'm not suggesting he should have been rude to Bob, but the amount of overt friendliness was nearly condescending and was so fake. If we require external validation disproportionately to our own internal validation, we will compromise our integrity and other virtues to attain it. Any desire beyond preference becomes need. I had a client whose need for acceptance and validation made him so vulnerable that his coworkers, friends, family members, and even his own children exploited his need for acceptance by persuading him to buy them luxurious things to the point that he was in financial ruin. Nearly none of these exploiting people ever gained self-reliance or independence because his enabling deprived them of these fulfilling virtues. No one was truly benefited. When he had a crisis in his own life, none of these opportunists were there to help or be supportive to him. This was emotionally crushing to him because he pathologically misread the quality of these relationships and was now shocked at their indifference to his own plights. Seeking physical flattery and compliments or praise to character and personality must be held in check. Our need for validation is toxic if it is risking other healthy relationships or life responsibilities. Through hard work, that man is now enjoying walks, drives, and even weekend travels solo. He enjoys his time alone now, and his family and friends enjoy him much more now too. Identification. This is a hybrid addiction of the need for companionship and validation because your identity becomes dependent upon other or others. In the companionship addiction, there's a need to avoid being alone, to avoid the suspicious realization that you're not interesting, charming, or fascinating enough by your own inner standard or opinion. It is revisited here because you seek companionship to define your value by others' need for your presence. A codependent takes on tasks, contingent relationships, and even likes and dislikes based on the need for approval and acceptance. The codependent companion will participate in all these things to sustain the relationship rather than feeling motivated to participate in these things for personal interest. The hybridized validation part is that this is combined with the need to receive external praise or appreciation. You don't really know where your likes and dislikes or even your own personality begins or ends without these other people. You like who and what they like, you dislike who and what they dislike. These tendencies and qualities are often the most pronounced in romantic and parental relationships. The one of most concern is the parental relationship addiction, so we will address this one in more detail. If we are honest and mature enough to accept that we have developed relationship dependence or addictions, the next step is to begin the process of liberating ourselves and those we're addicted to. It is rarely necessary to sever the relationships themselves. Relationships are necessary and important and a highly fulfilling component of life because the dynamics of give and take between human beings is not only fulfilling, but also how we evolve both consciously and even spiritually. Relationships are life's training grounds where we are required to find virtues such as tolerance, patience, and forgiveness. The parentaholic. Being a parent is a huge responsibility that none of us take seriously enough. There is no such thing as the perfect parent, and this is due to the inability for humans to solely exist selflessly. We will always be at least 1% motivated by a sense of personal satisfaction, achievement, fulfillment, or happiness. Being a good parent requires more selflessness than any other type of relationship, and it is easy to convince ourselves that everything we're doing as a parent is selfless. The example of spoiling reveals this. The parent who refuses to deny or set parameters or boundaries for his or her child is not being selfless. The parent is being selfish. By spoiling our children, we are avoiding the most challenging, least gratifying, and significant part of the parental role, responsibility of guiding our children into true maturity, which will give them access to personal fulfillment, not just happiness. My career as a family worker has been inundated with parents who become so focused on their children's approval and pleasure that they exchange their children's ultimate, long-reaching, more substantial access to fulfillment for transitory pleasure. Every one of them I met and worked with were ignorant to the deprivation they were actually causing their kids and had worked overtime to become convinced they were justified in spoiling them. A reminder of the major red flag indicator of life. If something is easy and convenient, it is proportionally unhealthy. I heartfully want to be a friend to my son, but not at the expense of the significant and required role of being his mentor, teacher, and guide, i.e. parent. The parentaholic is identified by being overly agreeable, passive, and undisciplined, but also has few, if any, other interests and involvements outside of parental duties. How are these kids going to learn about self-reliance if we do not show them by example? The sun and moon rise and set upon my son, but I must not burden him with the knowledge or responsibility of that. He requires space and privacy, and so do I. The best way to encourage our children to become self-reliant, independent people who create their own happiness in their world is to be the example of it. Parentaholic treatment. Parentaholics are required to find interests and involvements that are completely separate from their children. Children need space and they need to see, not be told, that the best happiness is through achievement and self-reliance. All of the driving forces for relationship addiction listed previously are present in the parentaholic child relationship, but are at a higher, more intense, and potentially toxic degree. If you suspect you may have a parenting addiction, reread the descriptions of driving forces with a scrutinizing eye and see how uncomfortable it gets. The more uncomfortable those driving forces descriptions are, the more intense the relationship addiction is, and the more urgently it needs to be reconciled and changed. RAT, relationship addiction treatment. A gradated process is the most effective and healthiest for all involved. Weaning yourself from the volume and involvement of the addicting relationship is most effective because it does not cause intense deprivation, triggering the addicted subconscious to rebel, defy, or sabotage the process. There are always exceptions to this rule. If you are in danger or are likely to physically hurt anyone, or if you have a history of hurting anyone, severing the relationship with total and abrupt absence is required. The gradated process is outlined here, and as usual, you can follow it to the letter and then modify and customize it as you gain some experiential insight through sampling. Relationship abstinence. Some addictions are so toxic, unhealthy, and unsafe that abrupt and total absence is required. If your relationship addiction is dangerous, total and abrupt absence is required. Most communities have resources for for support and intervention, such as women's shelters. If you are the dangerous one and are willing to be brave and selfless enough to sever a relationship to prevent you from doing harm, you should be commended, because it is rare to be so selfless with such a pathology. If we are forced to sever a relationship, we need to do everything we can to compensate for the time, attention, and companionship that relationship used to provide. Intense commitment is required to explore and experiment with healthy distractions and interests if we're ever to find replacements. Hobbies, projects, work, solo travel excursions, these can all be beneficial. Any social involvement could present opportunities, and this must be considered. The distractions experimented with should be activities that are not socially oriented. That is, they can include other people, just not be focused on them. When I went to Toastmasters meetings, there was a social element as I casually interacted with other members, but the interactions were superficial conventions, not projects that required close interaction or involvement. A 90-plus day period of absence should be adhered to. Those initial 90 days should include sessions of introspection, meditation, contemplation, and the hobby interest experimentations. The goal is to learn to live on your own and participate in interests individually and not be reliant upon the relationship dynamic. Separation. Begin by cutting involvement and relationship time by 1/3. Follow this for 3 to 4 weeks and then cut it by another 1/3 and adhere to it for 3 months, 90 days. Spend 1/3 of this new extra time alone by reading, exercising, or anything productive that can be done solo. House cleaning, organizing, online research, study for a class. Devote your time to healthy distractions to train how to use time for personal growth, achievement, and fulfillment. Seek and sample time usage that is for personal growth and not mere time-passing entertainment. Frivolously passing time will eventually give way to the addiction. 1/3 of the new extra time should be spent in gratuitous entertainment, TV, puzzle building, or other hobbies that are gratuitous and frivolous. Too much fulfillment and no frivolity makes life too serious, and the addict's subconscious will eventually rebel. The last remaining 1/3 of this time can be spent with other people, friends, family, or casual associates, and 1/3 of this time, 1/3 of this 1/3, in the presence of others should be solo in the sense of being around others, but not with them. A library, cafe, movie, gym, or other place of interest that is populated by people, but where you are not literally in their company. You are in the presence of others and will indeed have some limited and casual interactions, but you must be conscious to make all interactions brief and casual. If time allows, it can be a good exercise to take drives alone. Play music or drive in silence. No talk radio or phone time. Begin with 30 to 45-minute drives and work up to 1 to 2 hour drive times. Consider a solo road trip or overnight stay. You can interact with the hotel staff and other tourists where you are, as long as you're not inviting them or being invited by them. Try a night alone in a nearby town with only 1 or 2 phone interactions with friends or family of approximately 1 to 3 minutes each. Work your way up to a 2-night stay. Stay busy, tour, sightsee, get comfortable being uncomfortable. The goal here is to become more comfortable being alone and with being separated from the particular relationship of addiction, your DOC. Reunion. Reestablish relationship time only after the stress level of being alone is consistently a level 3 out of 10 or lower. Consistently here means that each and every time you are alone, the stress level is never more than a 3 out of 10. Be careful not to be too strict on this measurement or too easy. If you want to succeed and eventually have access to the very real benefits of a healthy relationship, you will be honest and do this uncomfortable work and sacrificing. Once 3 months have passed, reestablishment of prior time involvement is done in gradated stages. Once the 90-plus days have been accomplished, you can add approximately 10% more time together every 2 to 3 weeks. It's normal to have a hard reaction to this. It is very challenging because this formula is not easy for anyone. Do not reestablish relationship time beyond 60% of your overall wakeful time. No person should be consistently have more than 60% of his or her wakeful time within his or her relationship, except while on vacation. Even the mother of a newborn spends less time than that because the child is sleeping a majority of the time. Every relationship can become complacent if there is saturation of it, overexposure. If we are to keep a relationship dynamic and interesting in the long term, we must each have our independent interests and time spent individually. Continue your personal interests and other endeavors and practices even after more relationship time has been reestablished. Pay close attention to the stress levels of relationship deprivation, time apart. If it goes beyond A3, it is necessary to revisit some of the apart-time strategies to reassert them. Stress above a 3 and slipping back into old dependent habits is a relapse, and the recovery strategies need to be proportionally and temporarily revisited and applied. Over time, you will see your relationship improve and your feelings of being loved and appreciated will increase also. And here's one of my relationships right here. Hey, look at the camera. There you go. Say hi. Say everybody. You got a relationship with every one of them. We all do. Be sure to acknowledge this within your own mind to encourage your commitment and progress. Your addicted mind will certainly acknowledge the states of deprivation and discomfort for you, so be sure to counteract this with acknowledgement of your sacrifice and achievement too. Do this from within, as it is unlikely you will get a satisfying amount from others, not because they aren't giving it, but because your need for it may eclipse the amount given and make it seem like not enough. These same rules apply with the parental relationship addiction, but with more intensity, commitment, and some modifications. Do not limit your involvement with your children's needs or requirements such as feeding or health, obviously. But be careful, because you will likely find a way to justify interactions by conveniently categorizing their wants as urgent needs. No, your children's whining for you to watch TV with them or have dessert with them or take them to the store is not an urgent need. The gray areas are the routines such as bedtime reading, doing homework, and other healthy interactions that children require. For young children, be sure to have several intermissions of brief solo time, 20-minute periods for both of you throughout the day. Solo playtime, solo TV time, solo homework time, etc. For the older ones, especially teens, be sure to limit your interactions with them by having no more than 5 to 15-minute conversations with them about duties and or responsibilities and their personal lives. Limit these brief interactions to just a few per day, especially the personal ones, i.e. about peers, future or school concerns, etc. Resist the impulse to check on them and offer every advice that comes to mind or ask every question that seems pertinent to you. These pertinent questions should indeed be asked, but most of the time they can wait until an actual conversation can be had. And remember, these conversations are now limited to 5 to 15 minutes only. Set boundaries and rules for the kids and explain those boundaries with a 1 or 2 sentence description as to why and how these rules are there. Do not engage in lengthy or too brief explanations. Find your own interests and hobbies and realize that when you pursue them, you are not neglecting your children. You are setting a healthy example of independence. By this example, you are empowering them to be more independent and seek fulfillment. Do not interrogate your kids. Ask them questions and respect them as individuals, even when you know they're off. Do not be passive, do not be aggressive, and do not be passive-aggressive. Remember that these kids do not belong to you. They belong to themselves and to the world you brought them into. They are not your possession, so give them space. Believe it or not, you don't belong to them either. Maintain a quality of independence while simultaneously being totally committed to them. They will respect and admire you for both. As family, we can exist in a dualistic state of belonging to those we love and simultaneously independence. I exist for my son and I'm proud of that honor, yet I have other interests and responsibilities too. These other commitments can and will be circumvented if needed. The emphasis here is on the word needed rather than wanted. As they grow and get older, our close involvement should be proportionate. As my son gets older, I am proportionally more in the background, but I'm always there. Relationship aversion. Relationship aversion can also be an addiction, though it is uncommon. Monks and ascetics sacrifice personal relationships for religious, spiritual, or philosophical goals, but unless you fit this category, it is typically unhealthy. Relationships provide us with comfort, companionship, and support for our life's trials and tribulations. If you are pathologically avoiding relationships without a greater goal in mind, a gradual process of integrating relationships into your life is key. Review the text on sexual avoidance behavior for more insights into this and apply them accordingly. The driving force behind relationship avoidance is usually a fear of abandonment. By simply not having a relationship, we are not at risk for rejection. This can seem logical, but we cannot be at peace or fulfilled if we are depriving ourselves of the reciprocating features of relationships. Most of us simply cannot truly learn how to be giving and selfless without the classroom of relationships to grow and evolve from. We also can't feel whole or complete without being involved with others who depend on us and vice versa. Seek out a qualified and talented counselor who can guide you through the tricky and tumultuous seas of dating and friendships. Insist that a progressive and gradated formula is created to ease you into the relationship mentality and dynamics. Start with interacting with mere acquaintances and eventually move into casual friendships, and then, once comfortable, move into intimate or romantic relationships. Relationship avoiders may feel that relationships are simply not worth it. They are more work than play. They may have had past relationships that required them to work too hard to sustain it, or ones that didn't challenge them at all. They were either doing all the giving or all the receiving. Relationships need to be give and take, 60% giving and 40% receiving. If only we all had that mentality. When experimenting with relationships, it is vital to be conscious of the balances and work needed to sustain it. It can be easy to conclude that doing all the receiving, taking, is unhealthy, but the concept of giving everything is toxic too. Being all giving, passive, can seem nice, but it's not realistic or healthy. We not only have a right to individual needs and wants, but should not deprive someone else of the giving part of the relationship. Relationships are important. This is my roommate. We give and take. He gives me a few things, but he takes way more. Cha cha bang. Get busy, man. By slowly and progressively acclimating to relationships, you can break the subconscious fear of abandonment. Through steady and paced progress, we can establish balance and reciprocation. We will either preserve over these limitations or able to better scrutinize a relationship's potential. And here is my roommate relationship. Chow chow bang, also known as pie. Say hi. Say hi, dude. Don't just live here and not pay any rent and eat all the food. Say something. Contribute. Make a contribution. He says, I don't have opposable thumbs. I can't contribute shit. Love those you can and be loved by those you can. It's got to be a two-way street. Dun, 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 dun. Cha-cha bang. Cha-cha bang. The pie chow. Chow pie. Get going. Go get a job. Go get a job. I'm working here. All right. 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 That's it.